The Perfect Husband, the Scott Peterson case. Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2002, Modesto, California. A golden retriever named Mackenzie was found wandering outside 523 Covina Avenue, his leash still attached, dragging along the sidewalk. His owner, a beautiful and heavily pregnant woman named Laci Peterson, was nowhere to be found. It was Christmas Eve. She was 8.5 months pregnant, and within hours, the entire nation would know her name. What followed was one of the most watched, most dissected, and most bitterly debated murder cases in American history. A case involving a missing wife, an unborn child, a secret mistress, and a husband whose calm demeanor in the face of catastrophe would ultimately seal his fate. The victim, Laci Peterson. Laci Rocha was born on May 4th, 1975, in Escalon, California. She later moved to Modesto after her parents divorced, and when she graduated high school, she attended California Polytechnic State University, where she studied ornamental horticulture. By all accounts, Laci was the kind of person who lit up the room, warm, funny, domestically gifted, and deeply loved by everyone around her. She had a wide smile and appeared on missing person posters across the country and became, in that, one of the most recognizable faces in American true crime history. Laci met Scott Peterson in 1995 at a cafe where Scott was working as a waiter. They dated for 2 years and married in 1997. By 2002, the couple appeared to have everything: a comfortable home in Modesto, a baby on the way, and a life that looked picture perfect from the outside. Laci was 7.5 months pregnant with a boy they had already named Connor, with a due date on February 10th, 2003. She was glowing, active, and excited. Friends and family described her as radiant. She was 27 years old when she disappeared. The husband, Scott Peterson. Scott Peterson was a fertilizer salesman, the kind of man on the surface who seemed to have it all together. Handsome, confident, charming. He sold agricultural fertilizer for a company called Trade Corp, and was, professionally speaking, a capable and personable man. But beneath the polished exterior was something far more complicated. Scott and Laci had met in college at California Polytechnic State University and married shortly after. He was the kind of husband Laci's family initially liked, or at least tolerated. He was social, driven, and presented himself as a devoted partner. But those who knew him describe a certain emotional distance, a man who was difficult to truly read. When Laci disappeared, Scott was 30 years old. The day she vanished. On Christmas Eve, the morning, Scott Peterson said he left his pregnant wife alone to go fishing about 90 miles away at the Berkeley Marina. He said that Laci planned to walk the couple's dog, Mackenzie, and mop the kitchen floor. When Scott returned home hours later, he found Mackenzie there alone, still wearing a leash, but no sign of Laci. Scott called his mother-in-law, Sharon, to ask if Laci was with her. That call was when Sharon learned Laci was missing. Both Scott and Laci's stepfather reported her missing, and police received the report shortly before 6 p.m. From the very first night, something felt wrong. Not just about the disappearance itself, but about Scott. Neighbors noticed it. Investigators noticed it. When family and friends gathered at the Petersons' home that evening in a state of anguish, Scott told some of them he had gone to play golf that day. A different story from what he would later tell the police about fishing. That inconsistency, minor as it seemed, was the first crack in the wall. Scott quickly drew the scrutiny of investigators, who noted this seeming lack of concern over his wife's disappearance and his refusal to take a polygraph test. He didn't cry the way a husband was expected to cry. He smiled at candlelight vigils. He gave media interviews that felt rehearsed rather than desperate. To the public, watching from their living rooms, something was deeply, unsettlingly off. The fishing trip nobody knew about. One of the most damning early revelations was the fishing trip itself. Scott said he drove to the Berkeley Marina, almost 90 miles away, where he had told police he went fishing in a little aluminum boat he had recently purchased. One his own family never even knew he had. He had bought this boat in secret just weeks before Laci disappeared. A 14-foot aluminum fishing boat. He had never mentioned it to Laci's family, and barely to anyone in his own circle. The purchase was recent, the trip was solo, and the location, the San Francisco Bay, would become the most chilling detail in the entire case. Investigators also noted that in the weeks following Laci's disappearance, before her body was ever found, Scott sold his wife's car, looked into selling their house, and turned the baby nursery into a storage room. These were not the actions of a grieving husband waiting for his wife to come home. These were the actions of a man who already knew she wasn't coming back. The third person, Amber Frey. Then came the twist that detonated across the nation. On January 24th, 2008, Amber Frey, a Fresno massage therapist, came forward at a police news conference and revealed she had been having an affair with Scott Peterson. She said the affair began in November after Peterson told her he was single, meaning not married. Let that sink in. Scott Peterson, a happy man from the outside, was having an affair with a woman who he had lied to. Amber told reporters she had been completely unaware he was married. The moment she discovered his connection to the Laci Peterson disappearance, She called the Modesto Police Department immediately. But it was what Scott had told Amber that made everything far darker. Prosecutors revealed Peterson had told Frey he had lost his wife and would be spending his first Christmas alone, even though at the time of that conversation, Laci was still very much alive. Scott Peterson told his mistress he was a widower before his wife had ever gone missing. He was setting the stage. He was constructing the story. He was, in the words of the prosecutors, a man who had already decided what the outcome would be. After Frey went to the police, she cooperated fully with investigators and began secretly recording her phone conversations with Scott. When she took the stand at trial, jurors heard those recordings. Peterson, in his own voice, lying about where he lived, where he traveled, and who he was. She testified that he told her he was a widower and constructed an entirely fictional life for her benefit. Amber Frey was not a villain in the story. She was a woman who had been deceived, who did the right thing. The moment she understood what she had stumbled upon, she became the prosecution's most powerful witness. Not because she saw anything, but because of what Scott had said to her in his own voice on tape. The bodies surface. For nearly 4 months, the search continued. Volunteers, canals, field, prayer vigils. Sharon Rocha, Laci's mother, became a haunted but tireless presence in the media, pleading for her daughter's safe return. And then, in April 2003, the Bay gave up what it had been holding. On April 13th, 2003, Connor's tiny body was discovered, washed ashore the San Francisco Bay. Laci's body was discovered nearby just a day later. The bodies were found 1 to 2 miles north of where Scott Peterson had been fishing on the day Laci disappeared. The location was not coincidental. It was the same body of water, the same stretch of bay where Scott had claimed to be casting a fishing line while his wife walked the dog. Investigators alleged that on Christmas Eve, Peterson dumped the bodies from his fishing boat into San Francisco Bay, where they surfaced months later. DNA confirmed what everyone already feared. These were Laci and Connor Peterson, a mother and her unborn son, discarded into the cold water like they were nothing. The arrest and the disguise. Authorities caught up with Scott Peterson at a golf course in San Diego on April 18, 2003, and arrested him. But the circumstances of that arrest only deepened the suspicion surrounding him. Police found him with bleached hair and a goatee, carrying a large amount of cash. Investigators said he had dyed his hair, was carrying $15,000, his brother's ID card, and multiple cell phones. He was, to any reasonable observer, a man preparing to run, a man who had already become someone else. Scott Peterson was arrested, driven 10 hours back to Modesto, and booked into jail. He pleaded not guilty. The trial. Because of massive publicity, the trial was moved from Modesto to Redwood City in San Mateo County. It began in June 2004 and was made a spectacle unlike almost anything America had seen. Cameras outside the courthouse, crowds gathering for verdicts, legal analysts debating every detail on primetime television. Scott hired Mark Geragos, one of the most high-profile defense attorneys in the country. The prosecution's case was almost entirely circumstantial. There was no murder weapon. There was no crime scene. The exact time and method of death were never conclusively established. The lead prosecutor stood before the jury and told them plainly, "I cannot tell you when he did it. I cannot tell you if it was night or morning, but I can prove that he did it." The defense pointed to the lack of physical evidence. They pointed to the burglary that had occurred near the Peterson home around the time of Laci's disappearance. They argued that Scott had been tried by public opinion long before the jury ever sat down. But the jury had heard the tapes. They had seen Scott's behavior, the laughing at the vigils, the immediate dismantling of Connor's nursery, the secret boat, the secret mistress, the bleached hair, and the cash. Several jurors later said they made their decisions largely based on his complete absence of emotion. On November 12th, 2004, Scott Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder for the death of his wife, Laci, and second-degree murder for the death of his unborn son, Connor. Crowds outside the courthouse cheered. 4 months later, on March 16th, 2005, Scott Peterson was sentenced to death. The aftermath and the legal saga. The story did not end at sentencing. It rarely does. Over the years that followed, Scott filed multiple appeals. He claimed the negative publicity had prevented him from receiving a fair trial. He filed habeas corpus petitions. And then came a revelation about one of the jurors, a woman who had failed to disclose prior involvement in domestic disputes when filing out her jury questionnaire. Peterson's attorney argued she had looked them in the face and lied. In August 2020, The California Supreme Court overturned Peterson's death sentence, ruling that the original trial judge had made errors during jury selection. On December 8, 2021, Scott Peterson was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Then in January 2024, the Los Angeles Innocence Project, a non-profit dedicated to exonerating wrongly convicted people, announced it was representing Peterson and investigating his claim of actual innocence. A judge later granted a motion to allow DNA testing on a single piece of evidence: a strip of duct tape found on Laci's pants during her autopsy. Scott Peterson, now in his early 50s, continues to maintain his innocence. Laci's mother, Sharon Rocha, was never wavered. At the resentencing hearing in 21, she addressed Scott directly as he sat expressionless in handcuffs. After 19 years, she told him, she still felt the grief every single day. She called what he did evil, self-centered, and unforgivable. Two beautiful souls, she said, gone. This was a Love Gone Wrong production. Kindly share and subscribe and follow and comment. This was the Scott Peterson's case in the Love Gone Wrong series. Please remember to subscribe, follow, and share for more stories. Thank you very much.